Man grabs a child and runs off with them in his arms, leaving everyone shocked and desperate with the situation. But the real reason was what shook everyone to their core. This story took place on a calm afternoon, under the clear sky that usually blessed the rural area with serene days. Mr. Johnson was engaged in a routine task on his extensive farm. With firm steps and a watchful eye, he walked the perimeter of the vast lands under his care, inspecting every inch of the fences that protected the livestock and crops from the invasive outside world. As he adjusted a piece of barbed wire that seemed to yield under the weight of time, his eyes caught a movement in the distance, on the dirt road that snaked through his property until it disappeared into the horizon. It was a solitary figure, advancing with uncertain and faltering steps, almost as if each step were a question. Curious and concerned, Mr. Johnson set his tools beside the fence and started walking toward the road. As he approached, the silhouette began to take shape and revealed itself to be a young man. His disoriented walk and slouched posture suggested exhaustion or despair. Mr. Johnson, with his many years of experience, immediately recognized the signs of someone in serious need of help. "Hey boy, are you lost?" called Mr. Johnson, his voice carrying a mix of concern and welcoming. The teenager stopped, his eyes lifting with hesitation. His face, dirty from dust and marked by the sun, contrasted with the vulnerability in his eyes which swept the surroundings before settling on the older man. I don't know. I think so," he replied, his voice weak, betrayed by a visible tremor of uncertainty. Mr. Johnson approached closer, reducing the distance with slow steps so as not to startle the boy. "You look tired. Come with me. Let's find you a place to rest and something to eat. You can tell me how you ended up here once you're more comfortable." The young man looked at Mr. Johnson, measuring his sincerity. After a brief moment, a hesitant nod came as a response. He followed the farmer, with each step seeming less uncertain as they approached the big house. As they entered through the back door, Mr. Johnson guided the teenager to the spacious kitchen, where the smell of fresh bread and aromatic herbs filled the air. "Sit here. I'll get something for you to eat," he said, pointing to a sturdy chair by the wooden table. As the young man settled in, Mr. Johnson prepared a simple yet nutritious plate: homemade bread with butter, a piece of cheese, and a fresh apple. Placing the food in front of the boy, he watched him begin to eat with a mix of hunger and caution. "What's your name, son?" asked Mr. Johnson, sitting down at the table to offer company. "Michael," came the reply between bites. "I got lost. I've been walking for a long time. I'm not sure for how long." Mr. Johnson nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Well, Michael, you're safe here now. We'll figure everything out tomorrow. For today, you rest." This act of kindness, simple yet profound, not only offered Michael a temporary refuge, but also sowed the roots of a bond that would prove transformative, both for the lost young man and for the kind farmer. Unbeknownst to them, both had embarked on the beginning of a journey that would change their lives forever. As daylight began to give way to the elongated shadows of dusk, Michael's situation on the Johnson farm took on a more permanent shape. With each shared meal and every task completed side by side, a sense of belonging began to bloom in the young man's heart, a feeling that had been foreign and fleeting in his life until then. Mr. Johnson, observing how easily Michael integrated into the farm's routine, decided to call a family meeting. On a quiet evening after dinner, he gathered his wife and their 2 children in the spacious living room, where walls lined with family photographs seemed to bear witness to the seriousness of the moment. "As you all know, Michael has been with us for a few weeks now," Mr. Johnson began as everyone nodded. "He's been a great help on the farm, and more importantly, he's shown himself to be a young man with a good heart." Mrs. Johnson, always the first to offer a comforting smile, added, "He doesn't have anywhere to go, and well, I feel like he belongs with our family now. Don't you agree?" The couple's children, a teenager and a young adult, exchanged glances before agreeing. "He's cool, and I think he likes being here. It would be weird to see him leave now," said the younger son, clearly pleased with the idea of having a new brother. With the family unanimous in their decision, Mr. Johnson turned his attention to the practical matter of Michael's legal status. In the days that followed, he contacted local authorities and sought advice on how they could formally take in the young man. While they awaited responses and guidance, life on the farm continued as usual, with Michael becoming more involved in daily activities and family bonds. Michael, for his part, absorbed every gesture of acceptance like a balm for the wounds of a childhood marked by uncertainty and abandonment. He quickly learned not only the skills necessary for farm tasks, but also the habits and traditions of the Johnson family. From helping with the harvest of vegetables to participating in preparations for the local market, each day was an opportunity to strengthen his connection with his new family. As weeks turned into months, Michael's presence in the Johnson household became as natural as the vines that entwined the porch. He was no longer a stranger who had wandered onto the farm. He was now a family member, sharing in meals, laughter, and even moments of challenge. This growing integration was interrupted one morning by a letter from the local social services. The response they received was a mix of formality and hope, indicating that as long as no claims or objections arose from biological relatives, the Johnsons could begin the formal adoption process. With this news, Mr. Johnson knew it was time to share their plans for Michael's future with him. Finding him in the barn, where Michael was organizing some tools, Mr. Johnson placed a friendly hand on his shoulder. "Michael, we have something important to discuss about your place in this family and what comes next," he said, signaling the start of a conversation that would define the next chapter in the young man's life. As the seasons passed, the Johnson farm witnessed not only the cycle of planting and harvest, but also the blossoming of a new chapter in Michael's life. After receiving the initial letter from social services, Mr. Rafe and Mrs. Johnson immersed themselves in the legal processes required to formalize Michael's adoption. This process, though bureaucratic, was faced with unwavering determination, fueled by the love and commitment they felt for the young man they now considered part of their family. The family lawyer's office became a frequent destination, where documents were reviewed and signed, each paper a step toward ensuring Michael had a permanent home. The absence of claims from Michael's biological relatives simplified the process, allowing the family to proceed without significant legal obstacles. During this period, Michael, who had initially observed with a mix of anxiety and hope, began to allow himself to believe that he might have found a safe and loving home permanently. He became more deeply involved in the farm's routines, taking on responsibilities that reflected his growing confidence and respect for the land and the family that had taken him in. When they finally received the notification that the adoption would be formalized, Mr. Johnson organized a small ceremony on the farm to officially celebrate Michael's inclusion as a member of the family. It wasn't just a formal event, but a heartfelt celebration, planned with the same care and affection that they dedicated to their crops and livestock. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, under the centuries-old oak tree that dominated the farm's yard. Ribbons and lanterns decorated the trees, and the air was filled with the scent of wildflowers mixed with the sweet aroma of apple pies cooling on the kitchen windowsill. The family and a few close friends, all aware of the journey they had shared up to that point, gathered to witness and celebrate the occasion. Michael, dressed in a new shirt that Mrs. Johnson had insisted he wear, was visibly emotional. He looked at each face, seeing not only smiles of celebration, but also expressions of welcome and acceptance. The local judge, who presided over the ceremony, spoke briefly about the importance of family and community before formalizing the adoption with the words that sealed the Johnson family's commitment to Michael. When the document was signed and the applause echoed through the open space, Michael felt a sense of belonging that surpassed any legal document. It was a confirmation that the bonds of love and care that had grown over the months were now as permanent as the paper signed that day. As the ceremony ended and the sun began to set, giving way to a starry night, the celebration continued with a communal meal. As everyone gathered to share stories and laughter, the atmosphere was one of genuine joy, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Michael's life, now officially a Johnson. Years slipped quietly by on the Johnson farm, marked by the changing seasons and Michael's growth, who had transformed from an unexpectedly taken-in young man into a fundamental pillar of the family and the farm. Over time, he not only integrated, but also began to leave his mark on the community. And now he was preparing for one of his biggest challenges, organizing the grand annual family gathering. This event had been a tradition long before Michael arrived at the farm, an occasion that brought the extended Johnson family together from all over the country. Preparations began weeks in advance, with detailed lists and meticulous plans that transformed the event from a simple gathering into a spectacular celebration of family life and shared roots. Under Michael's careful supervision, the farm came alive with a vibrancy rarely seen during the rest of the year. Colorful flags were strung between the trees, long, sturdy tables were set up and covered with white linen tablecloths, each crowned with simple yet elegant floral arrangements that captured the essence of summer in the countryside. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked pies and succulent roasts filled the air, while Mrs. Nesmap Johnson and other skilled family members orchestrated a feast that promised to delight every palate. The menu was a blend of traditional family recipes and new additions that Michael had suggested, eager to add his personal touch to the table. As the day progressed, cars began to arrive along the gravel road, bringing with them the laughter and lively conversations of relatives who, although separated by distance and daily life, shared an indelible bond. Children ran across the fields, their joyful shouts rising above the constant murmur of conversations as they reunited with cousins seen only on occasions like this. Michael, moving among the guests with the ease that comes only with years of familiarity, ensured that every detail was perfect. His gaze occasionally caught scenes of reunions, the tight embraces of aunts and uncles, the firm handshakes between cousins, and the animated conversations that naturally sprung up among family members. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the music started. A local band, known for their ability to keep feet tapping and hearts warm, took their place on the makeshift stage. The first note of the acoustic guitar marked the official start of the party, and soon the space was filled with dancers of all ages. In this moment of uncomplicated celebration and joy, Michael felt a deep gratitude for being so deeply rooted in this family that had welcomed him without hesitation years ago. The love and acceptance that had blossomed since that first unexpected encounter on the farm road now reflected in the face of every person present. The party continued with lively energy, each laugh and each dance weaving the Johnson family stories even more deeply, when an unexpected incident captured everyone's attention, transforming the night in a way that no one could have predicted. Night fell over the Johnson farm, with the starry sky serving as a backdrop for the ongoing celebration. Laughter and music filled the air, mingling with the tempting aromas of homemade food still emanating from the buffet area. Children ran across the lawn, releasing paper lanterns that slowly rose against the night sky, their dancing lights reflecting the innocent joy of the family gathering. In this scene of carefree happiness, a moment of pure terror unfolded so quickly that no one could immediately grasp what was happening. Michael, who had been at the center of the festivities, ensuring that every detail of the party ran smoothly, suddenly found himself in the midst of sudden panic. It all began when a sharp scream tore through the tranquility of the night. It was a child's voice, followed by a stifling silence and then more screams. This time, a mixture of confusion and fear from the adults who turned to locate the source of the commotion. Michael, whose ever-sharp instincts often placed him in the role of protector, was last seen running toward the dense woods that bordered the property, carrying one of the younger children, a boy who seemed too frightened to protest. The boy's mother, realizing that her son was not among the children playing under the lanterns, fell into a state of palpable despair. Her face, previously lit with the contentment of the party, was now marked by tears and terror. She called out her son's name, her voice growing more panicked with each unanswered cry. The boy's father, along with other adults, quickly took action. They formed search parties, organizing with lanterns and instructions to scour every corner of the vast property. The orders were clear. Check every cabin, every trail in the woods, every spot where a child might hide or be hidden. The music and dancing stopped almost instantly, replaced by an urgent, tense atmosphere. The party, which had been a picture of joy and celebration, transformed into a scene of collective anguish. Guests joined the search, while others tried to comfort the distraught mother, who could barely stand in her state of distress. Meanwhile, Michael, with the boy still in his arms, disappeared into the darkness of the woods, out of sight of the guests and shrouded in mystery. What could have driven Michael, respected and loved by all, to act so abruptly and alarmingly? This question echoed in everyone's minds as the search intensified, with the hope that both he and the boy would be found safe and sound before the night gave way to dawn. As the night wore on, the grounds of the Johnson farm, usually a place of work and celebration, transformed into a dark labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Lanterns cut through the darkness, moving frantically in the hands of guests turned searchers, each driven by a mix of determination and desperation. The vast expanse of the property, normally welcoming and familiar, now felt strangely alien and intimidating under the cover of night. Small groups, hastily organized by the boy's father, split up in various directions. Some headed for the densely wooded forest to the north, where the thick underbrush made progress slow and meticulous. Others scoured the open fields to the south, their voices calling out the names of Michael and the boy, each shout a sharp reminder of the potential danger both faced. As the search teams moved, the boy's mother stayed close to the house, her hands clasped in silent prayer, her eyes fixed on the path leading to the woods. With each group that returned without news, her face grew paler, hope dimming like the starlight obscured by the dark clouds beginning to form in the night sky. Time seemed to warp, with minutes stretching into hours. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it unintelligible murmurs that only served to heighten the tension among the searchers. At one point, a lantern's light flickered through the mist that was beginning to form, a false alarm that sent a group running back to the meeting point, their faces marked by frustration and fear. Beyond the physical efforts of the search, psychological worry weighed heavily on every participant. Speculation about what might have driven Michael to act in such a way swirled uncontrollably. Had he perceived a threat that the others didn't see? Or was something more sinister unfolding under unknown pressure? As the night deepened, resources became scarcer. The boy's father, leading with a mix of courage and fear, decided they needed to expand the search area. Communicating through cell phones with rapidly draining batteries, he organized for some guests to fetch more lanterns, batteries, and even tracking dogs from a neighboring farm, hoping that the animals' keen senses might succeed where humans were failing. As they prepared for this expanded search effort, a brief pause allowed everyone to gather their strength and face the reality that the situation might not resolve as quickly or as easily as they had hoped. Still, the determination to find Michael and the boy before dawn kept everyone moving, each step a testament to their refusal to give up. At the edge of the woods, a muffled shout from one of the search teams signaled a new discovery. Hearts pounded with renewed hope as everyone rushed toward the location, ready to confront whatever awaited them. Night had completely swallowed the light when one of the search groups, equipped with newly acquired, more powerful lanterns and a renewed sense of urgency, decided to follow an old, seldom-used path that wound through the most remote part of the Johnson farm. The undergrowth made progress difficult, scratching at their legs and slowing their steps, but the muffled sound of voices seemingly coming from somewhere ahead urged them on. As they advanced, the silhouette of a structure began to take shape against the night horizon. It was a wooden cabin, long abandoned, with broken windows and a door hanging off its hinges, a silent testament to years of neglect. As they drew closer, the sound of voices became clearer, a mix of whispers and murmurs that seemed to sway with the wind. The searchers' hearts raced, a mix of hope and fear, making their hands tremble as they pointed their lanterns toward the cabin's entrance. The light revealed fresh marks on the dusty ground, footprints indicating recent passage. With a nod of the leader's head, the group positioned themselves around the cabin, bracing for whatever they might find. Slowly, the group leader pushed the door with the end of his flashlight. The sharp creak shattered the night's silence, echoing through the cold air like a forewarning. Inside the cabin, the lantern light danced on the wooden walls, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to move on their own. And there, in the farthest corner of the single room, Michael was kneeling on the floor, the child clinging to him, both appearing more relieved than frightened to see the lights. The tension that had filled the air until then began to slowly dissipate, but unanswered questions still kept everyone on edge. What had happened here? Why had Michael run into the woods with the child? His expression, though relieved, carried the weight of unspoken concerns, suggesting that the story behind his impulsive act was more complex than a simple misunderstanding. The searchers, still breathless from the run and the adrenaline of the moment, lowered their beams of light and cautiously approached. Michael looked at them, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and fear, knowing that the next words and actions would determine the many possible outcomes of this already unforgettable night. As the first murmurs of an explanation began to flow from Michael, everyone's attention was fixed on him and the child. The words, not yet fully formed, hung in the air, promising to reveal the hidden layers of a drama that had disturbed the Johnson family's peace more deeply than the night's darkness ever could. Just as the truth began to emerge from Michael's lips, the night was torn apart by the sound of approaching sirens. The blue and red glow of emergency lights cut through the darkness, bathing the abandoned cabin and its surroundings in intermittent flashes. The police vehicles, with their lights flashing incessantly, created a light show that seemed out of place in the usual tranquility of the Johnson farm. The officers, as they stepped out of their cars, brought with them an aura of authority and urgency that immediately altered the dynamics of the scene. With quick, decisive steps, they headed toward the cabin, their powerful flashlights and weapons in hand, ready to face whatever the night might hold. Every movement was calculated, every look intense, as they prepared to unravel the mystery that had mobilized an entire community. As they entered the cabin, they found Michael still kneeling, the child by his side, both surrounded by family members and searchers who had become witnesses to an unexpected drama. The police, with an efficiency that contrasted with the palpable tension of the environment, began to assess the situation, quickly asking about the child's well-being and the circumstances that had led to his temporary disappearance. Michael, whose intentions were still an enigma to everyone except himself and the child, slowly stood up. His face, illuminated by the flashing blue and red of the police lights, showed clear signs of exhaustion and emotional stress. Despite the confusion and suspicions hanging in the air, his demeanor was one of relief at having been found, mixed with an understandable caution under the officers' inquisitive gazes. The officers, maintaining a strict professionalism, listened as Michael began to explain, his voice steady but clearly laden with emotion. He spoke of his reasons, the circumstances that had precipitated his abrupt run to the safety of the cabin, details that began to shed light on the shadows of that turbulent night. As he spoke, the officers took notes, their eyes occasionally exchanging glances that suggested a continuous assessment of the credibility of his story. The communication between them, though subtle, was constant, a reminder that every piece of information would be crucial to fully uncovering the events of that night. As Michael concluded his initial account, one of the officers approached the child's parents, reassuring them that their son's well-being was the priority and that all necessary measures were being taken to ensure his safety. Relief and tension coexisted in the air, a mix of emotions that would only be resolved once all the pieces of the puzzle were in place. With Michael's first explanations given and the police fully involved, the night still held more revelations. The details that would follow promised to answer the many questions everyone had, and perhaps ease the minds of a family that just wanted to understand why one of their own had run into the darkness with a child in his arms. As the night deepened and the stars twinkled indifferently to the human drama below, the tension in the abandoned cabin slowly shifted from confusion and fear to a sharp focus on Michael. He had just finished weaving the last strands of his explanation, a narrative that had begun to ease the weight of silence and mystery surrounding his actions. However, the true twist was about to be revealed, bringing a new layer of shock to an already turbulent night. Among the guests who had followed the police to the cabin, one man stood out as particularly uneasy. He was a farm worker, known to everyone as a diligent and reliable employee, but his demeanor now revealed deep unrest. As Michael finished his explanation, attention began to slowly shift toward this man, whose heavy breathing and furtive glances did not go unnoticed. The pressure of the situation, intensified by the piercing gazes of the police and others present, seemed overwhelming. The man began to fidget uncomfortably, his eyes never settling on one spot for too long. Finally, with labored breathing and visibly sweaty, trembling hands, he succumbed to the weight of the secret he carried. Without a word from the police, without any direct gesture forcing him to speak, the man broke the silence with a voice that trembled as much as his body. He confessed that he had planned to kidnap the child during the party, seeing in the chaos of the celebration a perfect opportunity to mask his true intentions. The idea was to demand a ransom, a plan driven by financial desperation and a distorted notion that he could escape without consequences. The man's words hit like stones in the stomachs of all who listened. The surprise was universal, as no one could have imagined that such a seemingly loyal member of the farm's staff could conceive of such a nefarious act. The police quickly stepped forward, handcuffing the worker as he continued to spill the details of his thwarted plan, each word a confirmation of his guilt and regret. This moment of confession not only clarified the circumstances behind Michael's drastic actions, but also brought palpable relief to the child's parents, who held their son even tighter, grateful for his safe return and the timely intervention that had prevented a much worse outcome. As the man was escorted out of the cabin, everyone's attention remained fixed on the repercussions of his confession. Questions about how and why he had come to such a decision still hung in the air, a grim reminder that even in such a close-knit community, hidden despairs can lead to acts of unimaginable desperation. With the worker now in custody and the details of his plan being recorded by the police, the community began to process the trauma of the night, each person grappling with the revelation in their own way, as they prepared for the next steps and the measures that would need to be taken to restore peace and security to the farm. The night was still shrouded in tense silence when the last words of the dishonest worker echoed through the cabin and across the surrounding fields. The revelation of such a sinister plan had deeply shaken the community. But amid this whirlwind of emotions and confessions, Michael emerged not as a fugitive, but as an unlikely hero whose hasty actions had in fact safeguarded an innocent life. Michael, with his sharp perception and intuition that had always served him well, had begun to notice signs of irregular behavior in the worker weeks before the party. Small deviations in routine, phone conversations that abruptly stopped when someone approached, and a poorly concealed anxiety that seemed to consume the man. For Michael, each of these details formed a mosaic of suspicions that, though initially vague, began to take on an alarming shape as the party approached. On the fateful night, as the farm filled with laughter and music, Michael kept a watchful eye. His vigilance led him to witness a discreet exchange between the worker and an unknown figure at the edge of the property, an encounter that confirmed his suspicions and catalyzed his decision to act. Knowing that directly confronting the man could lead to a dangerous confrontation or trigger a reaction that would put the child at immediate risk, Michael chose a more cautious approach. With a plan born out of both desperation and a desire to protect, Michael seized a moment of distraction during the party to take the child to a place he knew well, an abandoned cabin that was rarely visited by others. There, he hoped to keep the child safe while figuring out how he could alert the others without provoking a dangerous reaction from the worker. As they sheltered in the cabin, Michael tried to soothe the child, offering comfort and security, explaining in simple terms that they were playing a game of hide and seek so that the child wouldn't be frightened. At the same time, he kept his cell phone close, waiting for an opportunity to send a distress signal that wouldn't put them in immediate danger. These actions, born out of necessity and courage, underscored Michael's unwavering commitment to the family that had taken him in years ago and the community he now called his own. As the revelation of these details began to dispel the night's shadows and the misunderstandings against him, gratitude and admiration for his bravery started to replace fear and uncertainty. With the truth of Michael's intentions now clear to everyone, the tension that had filled the air began to dissipate. The night, though still heavy with reflections and the repercussions of what had been revealed, now promised to move toward a resolution and understanding that had previously seemed distant. After the tumultuous revelations and confessions that marked the night, a palpable sense of calm began to settle over the Johnson farm. The stars, silent witnesses to the events, seemed to shine a little brighter, reflecting the collective relief that filled the air. The threat had been dispelled, and with it, the weight of uncertainty that had pressed on the hearts of everyone present. At the center of it all, Michael became the focus of a deep sense of gratitude. The Johnson family, especially the child's parents, approached him with a recognition that went beyond words. They embraced him, a gesture that conveyed more than any speech could. It was a hug that spoke of relief, of a silent thank you for having their son back in their arms. Safe and sound, thanks to Michael's quick thinking and bravery. The guests, who hours earlier had been gripped by panic and confusion, now gathered around Michael, each one eager to express their admiration and gratitude. Hands were shaken with fervor, backs were patted in gestures of camaraderie and respect. The air was charged with a renewed sense of community spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, courage and decisive action can bring light and resolution. The children, unaware of the full gravity of the situation, but attuned to the adults' relief, now ran around with renewed energy, their laughter once again filling the space that had, for a brief period, been taken over by fear. They gravitated toward Michael like a hero in their imagined adventures, seeing in him the embodiment of a protector. As they sheltered in the cabin, Michael tried to soothe the child, offering comfort and security, explaining in simple terms that they were playing a game of hide and seek so that the child wouldn't be frightened. At the same time, he kept his cell phone close, waiting for an opportunity to send a distress signal that wouldn't put them in immediate danger. These actions, born out of necessity and courage, underscored Michael's unwavering commitment to the family that had taken him in years ago and the community he now called his own. As the revelation of these details began to dispel the night's shadows and the misunderstandings against him, gratitude and admiration for his bravery started to replace fear and uncertainty. With the truth of Michael's intentions now clear to everyone, the tension that had filled the air began to dissipate. The night, though still heavy with reflections and the repercussions of what had been revealed, now promised to move toward a resolution and understanding that had previously seemed distant. After the tumultuous revelations and confessions that marked the night, a palpable sense of calm began to settle over the Johnson farm. The stars, silent witnesses to the events, seemed to shine a little brighter, reflecting the collective relief that filled the air. The threat had been dispelled, and with it, the weight of uncertainty that had pressed on the hearts of everyone present. At the center of it all, Michael became the focus of a deep sense of gratitude. The Johnson family, especially the child's parents, approached him with a recognition that went beyond words. They embraced him, a gesture that conveyed more than any speech could. It was a hug that spoke of relief, of a silent thank you for having their son back in their arms, safe and sound, thanks to Michael's quick thinking and bravery. The guests, who hours earlier had been gripped by panic and confusion, now gathered around Michael, each one eager to express their admiration and gratitude. Hands were shaken with fervor, backs were patted in gestures of camaraderie and respect. The air was charged with a renewed sense of community spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of circumstances, courage and decisive action can bring light and resolution. The children, unaware of the full gravity of the situation, but attuned to the adults' relief, now ran around with renewed energy, their laughter once again filling the space that had, for a brief period, been taken over by fear. They gravitated toward Michael like a hero in their imagined adventures, seeing in him the embodiment of a protector. That day, as the daily farm tasks resumed, Michael's presence seemed omnipresent. He was helping here, comforting there, always available, always attentive. To the Johnson family, he was not just an adopted member, but a true son, whose loyalty and courage transcended the bonds of blood. As the evening fell and the farm prepared for dinner, Mr. Johnson invited Michael for a walk through the fields. Together, they walked side by side, the elder sharing stories of the farm's past, while the younger listened attentively, his presence there as natural and essential as the earth beneath their feet. This moment of communion between father and adopted son symbolized Michael's complete redemption, not just in terms of his acceptance into the family, but in his own self-acceptance as a man worthy of love, respect, and belonging. He had faced the hardest test and emerged not just intact, but elevated. As they returned home, ready to join the others for dinner, it was evident that the incident, though it had begun with notes of fear and uncertainty, had culminated in a comforting certainty. Michael was, and always would be, home. As events unfolded, and the workers' confession still echoed in everyone's minds, the judicial process began with surprising efficiency. The authorities, already informed and equipped with the evidence and testimonies gathered on that tumultuous night, acted quickly to ensure that justice was served. The worker, whose nefarious plan had been revealed in critical detail by his own trembling voice, was detained and swiftly brought to trial. The local courthouse, an old building that usually resonated with the echoes of minor disputes and bureaucratic matters, found itself at the center of unusual attention. The community, still shaken but relieved by the resolution of the case, followed the proceedings with keen interest. The trial sessions were marked by respectful silence and palpable tension, as everyone present felt the weight of what was being decided. During the trial, the defendant had the opportunity to express his motives, revealing a desperate plot driven by mounting debts and a perceived lack of options. His words, though attempting to paint a picture of personal despair, did not lessen the severity of his actions. The prosecution, relentless, presented a strong case against him, highlighting not only the careful planning of the crime, but also the imminent danger he had posed to an innocent child. As the trial progressed, the Johnson farm, though free from the physical presence of danger, now operated under a new norm. The previous serenity was replaced by heightened vigilance, a subtle shift in routine that involved more frequent security checks and more open communication about the presence and activities of visitors and workers. Michael, as the inadvertent catalyst of this new prudence, was often consulted on best practices, his insight and bravery recognized as valuable assets. When the trial reached its inevitable verdict, with the worker being found guilty and sentenced to a significant penalty, a collective sigh of relief was felt throughout the community. Justice had been served, not only in the form of punishment for the guilty, but also in the reinforcement of the commitment to collective safety and well-being. At the farm, life began to resume its course with cautious normality. The daily work, established routines, and family interactions continued, now tinged with the understanding that tranquility can be quickly disrupted, but also restored through resilience and community unity. As the sun set on a particularly productive day, casting a golden reflection over the vast fields of the farm, peace seemed to have been restored. But the lesson remained. Vigilance and courage, as demonstrated by Michael on that critical day, were treasures that should be maintained and honored. A truth that everyone on the farm now recognized and deeply valued. As the seasons passed on the Johnson farm, the incident from that fateful night became intertwined with the history and spirit of the place, transforming into a narrative of perseverance and human integrity. Michael, whose quick action and brave heart had saved a life and restored peace, became an emblematic figure not only among the Johnsons, but throughout the surrounding community. The farm, with its vast fields and tranquil pastures, continued to be a gathering place for parties and reunions, but now it also served as a silent testament to the human capacity to overcome adversity through compassion and altruism. The stories of the night when Michael made the courageous decision to protect the child were frequently told and retold, each retelling adding a layer of admiration and respect for his character. In the years that followed, the Johnsons took the initiative to further strengthen community bonds, organizing workshops on safety and first aid, and promoting events that encouraged collective vigilance and mutual support. Michael, often at the center of these initiatives, shared his experiences and the lessons he had learned, emphasizing the importance of always being prepared and of looking out for one another. Michael's influence extended beyond the physical boundaries of the farm. Local schools began inviting him to speak about courage and integrity, transforming him into a role model for young people who learned not only to value justice, but also to act with bravery in the face of danger. His legacy of kindness, a counterpoint to the malicious act he had helped to thwart, inspired a new generation to stand up against injustice with compassion and determination. The Johnsons, in turn, continued to be seen not just as guardians of a large farm, but as custodians of the moral values that upheld the community. The story of Michael and the incident at the party, now an integral part of the family's legacy, was remembered not as a moment of fear, but as a turning point where kindness proved more powerful than any malice. As the sun set on another day at the farm, casting long shadows over the land Michael had helped to protect, the family gathered for another evening of togetherness and sharing. Among laughter and plans for the future, there was a shared sense of gratitude and a renewed belief in the strength of the human spirit. Kindness, like the great tree under which they sat, had deep and enduring roots, strengthened by the courage of a man who, once a stranger, was now a brother, a son, and above all, a true hero.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.